Let's continue my conversation with Masego Sheburi from the IEC. He is the Deputy Chief Electoral Officer. So, Mr. Sheburi, one of the things that I will take you to now is, let's start with your announcement that the reopening of candidate list submissions. And let me suggest to you that it may be that your bona fides cannot be questioned. They are proper, you are acting with bona fide intent in as far as that is concerned, the amendments. But some of the things you've done, and this is the suggestion that I'll ask you to respond to, sort of opens you up to suspicion. The order says specifically, after the proclamation has happened, you will announce you must announce the amendments that you deem to be reasonably necessary. The speed and keenness with which you announced that reopening of candidate submission without announcing any other amendments to the timetable opens you up to suspicion. Do you agree with that?
No, I disagree, Thulasizwe, because it is not so. You recall that the court order said within 3 days we must take certain decisions.
Yes.
And the Commission acted consistent with that order in that on Monday, we consulted with political parties in the National Party Liaison Committee. After that consultation, the Commission made its determination and it briefed the nation by way of a press briefing on the same day, which was the last day in terms of which the court had determined that we must take certain decisions and make them public and communicate same to the Minister of Cooperative Governance. And one of the key decisions that the Commission took, the Commission could have taken an easy way out and say the court gave us an option to either hold a voter registration weekend or to allow registrations at the offices of the Electoral Commission. The Commission consciously decided to take the difficult decision of organizing a voter registration weekend where we open 23,000 voting stations, because we understood that if we do so, we provide equitable opportunities to all South Africans to access the right to vote. Whereas if we had only said we will continue with registration at our offices, we only have about 257 offices, and those offices may not be accessible to the totality of the voting population who wanted to interface with us. So we took the difficult decision of opening all registration weekend, and what that means is that those persons, once registered, are entitled to certain rights.
I hear you.
Among others, the right to vote. Yes.
I hear you, but that's not the question I'm asking. The question I'm asking says, in terms of the constitutional order, you were only meant to announce the amendments to the timetable once the Gazette had happened, and in announcing the amendments after 3 days, at the point at which you were only supposed to announce and brief the minister about the practicality of holding a voter registration weekend. That's all you were meant to do after 3 days. But the keenness with which you then said, oh, by the way, in fact, it wasn't a by the way, it was one of the central messages. Part of what we will do in amending the timetable will be to reopen the submission deadline for parties to submit their candidates lists. An action you were only meant to take after the proclamation by the minister. You seem very keen to help the ANC, some would say.
The thesis of the Commission's decision is that once the Concord set aside the proclamation by the minister, it reopened the voter registration period. And a consequence of registering voters is that the voters' roll, which was sealed, is now open. And following from voter registration, there are consequential amendments that needed to be made. And the Commission was of the view that it is better to communicate those upfront so that there is clarity among political contestants and stakeholders. Because if only you announce those by way of publishing a timetable after proclamation on the 20th of September, and you provide only a day for parties to submit their candidate nomination, you would have been accused also of saying you're giving a notional right which is incapable of being exercised because the timelines are so short. So we are mindful that the timetable by its very nature will be truncated. It will not afford as much time as the timetable that we published on the 4th. And only on those considerations and only for those reasons, the Commission was minded to release it much earlier rather than wait for the proclamation. The official timetable, you are correct, will be only issued competently on the 20th of September following the proclamation by the Minister.
So that deadline initially for the submission of party candidates lists and the payment of deposits that happened previously in August, I think mid to late August. What's its status then? What are you saying about its validity? Was it valid or was it not valid to the extent that you deem it reasonably necessary now to do another submission of party candidates lists? And I understand what you are saying about once a new voter is added to the voters' roll, then they become eligible to be elected as well. That's not the question I'm asking. The question I'm asking is, what are we to read then? Do you deem that what you did was not legally compliant in as far as this aspect is concerned?
The timetable, and it's not a decision of the Commission. The timetable in terms of the court order remains valid until amended by the Commission after proclamation. So what we've communicated to political parties, over 200 political parties that had submitted their list of candidates and over 78,000 candidates, was that unless they wish to change their nomination, those things we can preserve, they remain valid. So political parties that are happy with their submission do not need to take any action, they just need to resubmit on the 21st of September. Those that wish to amend their list, given that there are new voters or voters who or candidates that they had nominated have now updated their registration details and they want to update those to reflect on their candidate submission, they will also have that opportunity.
So the long and short of it is that that process was legally compliant. It's just these new other considerations that come into play for any party and as a sidebar, including the ANC, who may want to amend, add, etc. to their candidates lists. What you're saying, though, is that as far as you are concerned, it was legally compliant.
It was legally compliant. It is preserved by the court order, and we to the extent that it is preserved by the court order, we respect that, and that as the court has authorized, we will amend where it is reasonably necessary. And the conclusion of the Commission is that amending the timetable for free and fair election in this context is compliant with the order, and it facilitates the freeness and fairness of the elections.
So if that process is legally compliant and the lists that the parties submitted and paid deposits for by the deadline in August, if that is legally compliant and valid with the optional idea that if you want, you can amend and sort of add to it, etc., etc. If that be the case, then, you know, I don't know, I'm just grappling with the idea that political parties, the way that they'll be viewing what is happening at the moment, for instance, this question of new voters being added in, becoming eligible to being elected after being registered voters. Someone would say, if you're saying that process was legally compliant and remains preserved and valid, those lists are closed, are they not? In that even what you are making provision for a person who registers to vote on the 18th of September and then wants to be part of the election as a candidate, there's very little room for them to do that because the lists, for instance, of parties such as, I don't know, IFP and Bushbuck Ridge Residents Associations had been concluded, and therefore there's no, you're creating special room where it may not even be necessary because the lists should be closed, should they not?
No, Thulasizwe. And the point is this: if the Commission had wanted to create special room, it would have caved in when requests were made after the proclamation period on the 23rd of September to reopen the process. The Commission, on more than 2 occasions, refused to reopen candidate nomination, and by so doing, it honored the jurisprudence that was established in the NFP and IFP cases in previous elections. But we seem to be missing that there is a legal implication that arises from an election being set aside. The Constitutional Court said the proclamation of the minister on the 3rd of August is unconstitutional, invalid, and it is set aside. In other words, there is no election. The minister must proclaim the elections anew. And only on that day would the voters' roll to be used for that election close. If you say you can't reopen the timetable to effect necessary changes for free and fair election, it means then that there is no point in the Constitutional Court ordering that the proclamation was invalid, because those persons cannot be lawfully placed on the voters' roll. We accept that as is an interpretation, the court may just decide that we got this thing wrong, and therefore there is a court case at the instance of the DA in the Constitutional Court, and tomorrow we will be filing our affidavit to indicate the basis on which the Commission came to the conclusion that it did. We think we are acting consistent with the court order. We think we are acting consistent with our legal obligation to deliver free and fair elections.
Would it not have been wise, Mr. Sheburi, as a parting shot from me, for you to have waited for the fully reasoned judgment of the Constitutional Court? Because I suspect that, perhaps, and I'm hoping that the justices make it clear what falls within the parameters of reasonably necessary amendments. Because right now, would you not agree that you run the risk that after you've gone and acted in this way, thinking that these are reasonably necessary amendments, the reopening, only to find out that this court case that's launching, as you are talking about now, won't even be necessary, in that the definition and the contours of what's reasonably necessary may emerge from the full judgment of the court. Again, your keenness to act before you know the fully reasoned decision of the court may open you up to suspicion.
We could have waited, Thulasizwe. However, there is a immutable and finite date on which election must be held. That is the 1st of November. It is immutable. We can't change it. And the court had instructed in clear terms that within 3 days we must take certain decisions. We took those decisions, and some of the adjustment to the timetable are consequential to those decisions that had been taken by the Commission. But as I said, if we are wrong, we will have clarity from the Constitutional Court, and we will adjust our plans consistent with the Concord. If we are right, however, it means we have salvaged and saved some time in the timetable to enable a possible voter registration weekend to be effected in the timetable to give persons the right to exercise their right to franchise.
All right, for your candid engagement, I've got to thank you, Masego Sheburi from the IEC. He is the Deputy Chief Electoral Officer, just explaining some of their reasoning and thinking around this Constitutional Court, the Constitutional Court order and its implications and preparations for the upcoming election that's coming up on the 1st of November.